So I think I figured out the model that Illuvium's going to use to figure out how much your fuel is worth, your crypton, your hyperion, and your solons. To be honest with you, I'm not sure it's the best model out there. So in this video, I'm going to go through the model that, to my understanding, is what Illuvium is planning on using, and what I think is a better model for this. So let's look into here. Model A is what, to my understanding, Illuvium is using. Model B is a second model that I think could work better. So let's talk about the model that is already in place. So the fuel is pegged to USD. In-game purchases are also pegged to USD. Travel, curing, and crafting will all have rails that allow for a 25% fluctuation up or down. If the demand for fuel exceeds its 25% of its base value, the rails prevent it from going higher. At that point, the DAO steps in and provides the additional fuel needed. So the pros for this, in terms of the lore and logic, the same amount of fuel will get your action completed. So for example, if a stage 1 travel is 100 crypton, then it'll always be 100 crypton no matter the value of the crypton or how many players are in the ecosystem. The cons for this is that the Illuvium team basically dictates the value of your fuel. If Illuvium prices a tier 1 travel at $1 and 100 crypton, your crypton will be worth 1 cent per unit. Now you'll have the plus or minus 25%, but the rail set in place will prevent you from exceeding that 25%. And they're doing this so that the travel costs for the overworld players, stay within a range that everyone can afford. Your fuel production and therefore your plot of land will not produce more value even when the Illuvium fuel demand goes up. So basically, if we start with 100,000 players and then go to 1 million players, with this model, you're only going to get that 25% bump. Now, I've talked about this in the Discord. I've gone back and forth with a few different people, and their possible solutions for this were that they could alter the weather to satisfy the lore and increase the amount of fuel production that each land can produce. For example, someone said a storm that puts Hyperion into the atmosphere. So maybe your extractors can extract more Hyperion, or your converters, can convert more Hyperion from the atmosphere. And that would be one way to get each plot of land more fuel to sell. The second thing that they said they could do is that they could adjust the fuel on a monthly basis and then airdrop any additional ETH that the landowners are basically entitled to at the end of that month. And so if you're not aware, landowners as a whole are said to get about 5% of the in-game revenue. So if the demand goes up by a lot and you're only getting 25% on your fuel, but say that only equals out to 3% of the Illuvium's in-game revenue, then that extra 2% will be airdropped and distributed somehow to all of the landowners. And honestly, to me, that just seems like you're making things a lot more difficult than it needs to be. And another problem with this is that, let's say we go through another bull market and then we go back into a bear market. If demand drops below 25% of that baseline, I'm not sure how they're going to hold up that lower rail. They're not going to get to a point where Illuvium is paying out the landowners 75 cents on the dollar when the demand is down 80, 90%. So at that point, I'd assume there would be some kind of IIP coming out saying that they can't provide that fuel because the DAO needs it. But let's move on to Model B, which is the model that I think could work and I think is a better solution. So in my model here, the travel, curing, and crafting costs are still pegged to the US dollar, but the fuel is priced by the open market. The in-game purchases will use fuel, and the rails can still be set to the price of in-game purchases, but not to the value of fuel. So the pros for this one. This allows for the US dollar price for in-game purchases to still remain the same. So that same example of $1, it could still go up and down 25% for those overworld players. But it allows for fuel to gain value based on supply and demand. If demand increases and Krypton becomes more valuable in the free market, that same tier 1 travel can be priced at that $1, but the cost in Krypton could fluctuate day to day. And I'll show you what I'm talking about this with a couple spreadsheets in just a second. So the cons for this is that it would conflict with the lore. 100 Krypton may get you a tier 1 travel today, but in the future date, it might cost a different amount of Krypton depending on the supply and demand. And my possible solution for this would be similar to a possible solution that they had in their first model. To satisfy the lore, when the demand goes up, they could have something like the plants release more oxygen into the atmosphere, making the travel, curing, and crafting require less units of fuel. And just back to the cons real quick, when I was discussing this in the Discord, the only real con that anyone was coming back at me with was that it would mess up the lore. And that in real life, if a certain amount of gallons of fuel will get you a certain distance in a car, so in Illuvium, the same amount of crypton should always get you the same fuel. I don't think that's enough of a con to not use this model. Okay, so let's look over here. So this is similar to what Fancy Birds uses. You can see this is an item I picked for Fancy Birds. And on the left side here, you can see that this item is pegged to $1. But then you can see right here, it costs 493 of their synthetic FNC token. And that's because of the demand on that token and its value. So at this particular time, it could have cost me 493 FNC. But if the demand goes up, like the crypto markets are going up right now, if I went back into it, it might only cost me 420 FNC to get that same item. So now let's move to these charts here. So for these charts, I made the base value at $1 for a tier 1 travel and 375 crypton. If you saw the last video where I was talking about Illuvium Zero prices, you'll see that, up here for the overworld private beta, a stage 1 travel cost 375 crypton, so that's why I'm using that. So let's assume that 375 crypton is equal to $1 for that baseline. These two charts over here on the left, the one with the purple here is based on Illuvium's model, and the blue one is based on my model. The pink here, and here is the base value plus or minus 25%. And then the green here, and here is what would happen if the demand exceeds 25%. So you can see here, right now at 1, we're at the base value. So in both scenarios, you'll be looking at 375 crypton, and it would be around $1. And that would mean each one of your crypton units is around 0.27 cents. Now I can adjust this up and down 25%. So let's say we go down 25%. Both scenarios, it would still be 375 crypton units. It would be 75% for the overworld players, and your crypton unit would be worth 0.2 cents. Now, if we go up 25%, both models actually act the same for that first 25%. So both models will cost 375 crypton still, but for the overworld players, that will cost them $1.25. And that would mean each of your crypton units are worth 0.33 cents. So here's where the difference comes in. So now we're going to look at the green ones here. If the demand goes beyond 25%, which I think it definitely could be. If we start with 100,000 players, and in 6 months we have 300,000 players, the demand could easily go up, 200%, not just 25%. So let's bring this demand up to, let's say, 2 times the base demand. Now, you can see with this top model, the rails are set, so it's still going to cost 375 crypton, and it's going to cost the overworld players $1.25 to get that, even when the demand doubled. But if you can see down here, with my model, it's still going to cost the overworld players $1.25 for that tier 1 travel, but since the crypton value went up, it's going to cost less crypton. So in this scenario, it would now cost 234 crypton, and each crypton unit would be worth 0.53 cents. You can see how that bottom one's going to adjust if I go up, let's say, 3 times. So again, top model doesn't change. In the bottom model, no matter how high it goes, it's still going to cost the overworld player $1.25, but now it's only going to cost 156 crypton. And then each crypton unit is going to be worth 0.8 cents. So you can see how this goes. As the demand goes up with my model here, let's say we go 5 times, it is not going to affect the players in the overworld, but it's going to make the crypton, or whichever fuel we're talking about, because all 3 of the fuels are going to work independently, it'll make each fuel unit worth more. And if you own land right now and you're playing land, or you plan on playing land, then I'm sure you believe, just like I do, that Illuvium is going to be big. Whatever the demand is at launch date, I think it could easily go 5, 10 times. If we're talking about years down the road, we could be looking at 20 or 30 times the demand from day 1. So with this model, things don't need to be adjusted on a monthly basis, and different lore doesn't need to be really incorporated in to increase the amount of fuel that can be extracted from each plot of land. This way, it simply works on its own in a free market. And they've also talked about eventually putting the fuel on chain. So then you'll have your Crypton, your Hyperion, and your Solon on chain. If you put it on chain, then this is really the only model that works. This model A that, again, I believe is what Illuvium is talking about using, it won't work once fuel is on the blockchain and it's tradable in the free market. And then we can just look over to the right side here. So you can plug in here how much fuel that you think you could produce in one day. And let's just, estimate it at 500 units of fuel. If you're at the baseline, then that 500 units of fuel might only get you $1.33 per day. And with that first model, if you go up to that 25% plus, you still might only be getting a little over $2 a day if you're extracting 500 units of fuel. With my model here, you could see beyond that 25%, your Crypton value will keep going up. So when you get to, 200% more, you could be at $12 for your 500 units. And then you keep going up. And if you get up to 400% more of that base value, your 500 units of fuel might get you $33 a day. And that's only at 400% demand. Again, if we started at 100,000 and in a couple of years we're at 1 million or 2 million players, you could be up 1,000 or 2,000%. And this would continue to scale up. Let me know down below if you think my model makes sense, or if you have a better understanding of the model that Illuvium is using and you think that I've got it wrong. Let me know that as well. But I've had some conversations in the Discord, and I do believe that this is the model that they're planning to launch with. And on top of that, let me know if you think my model is better. And who knows, if this Illuvium model is correct and we can get enough chatter around the model that I made up, maybe we can put together an IIP and see if we can put it through. But that's all I got. Again, I hope it made sense. I hope you followed along, and I'll see you in the next one.